Hey everyone, welcome to our latest episode of Chain of Thought. Today we're going to talk about our newest leaderboard on professional domains. My name is Brad Kensler. I'm the head of agent capabilities and environments here at Scale AI.
Hi, my name is Faiza. I am a research scientist here at Scale.
Hey, I'm Advait. I'm a research engineer at Scale.
Hi, I'm Calvin, and I do ML research operations here at Scale.
Awesome. So let's just jump right into it. Faiza, I'm interested to learn more about the basics of this leaderboard. Like, what is it? What is it trying to evaluate?
Yeah, so this one is particularly designed to evaluate real-life reasoning-based questions that come up in experts, professionals' day-to-day workflows. These are open-ended questions, and the evaluation is, because of the open-ended nature, is based on rubrics which involve a set of criteria describing the desired and undesired properties of an ideal response. You think of those as the types of questions that an actual expert or a client would ask that has nuances, real-life complexity, and so on.
Yeah. So setting the stage a bit, in this benchmark, the LLM in this case is a professional, right? Or we're trying to evaluate its knowledge and capability as a professional. And so we have these prompts that some person would ask this professional. And I'm curious, like what kind of domains did we focus on?
Right now, it is law and finance.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm curious, why did we pick those two domains?
Yeah, I guess just in general in AI right now, you have these models that are really good at these very verifiable tasks like math and coding. And it's super easy to kind of hill climb on these tasks that we've seen. But if you see kind of like the economic use, not just narrative, but research going on recently with a lot of these other benchmarks, and more so kind of how we use AI or experts use AI in general, be it through the ChatGPT or Claude website. You kind of see that both experts and non-experts use them a lot for financial and legal queries. Mm-hmm. And these are pretty high stakes domains where AI making mistakes and capturing that is pretty important, but they're not as verifiable as math, for example. So you kind of want to provide a benchmark where you have these rubrics that can be used to verify difficult questions in these domains because they're so high impact.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like we've seen some self-reported statistics for like usage patterns from these labs, right? That like indicate that like these are areas where their users are asking a lot of questions. And like you said, it makes sense to get a better measure of like how reliable actually our models are.
Yeah, like for example, I would use ChatGPT to ask questions about my taxes if I'm confused, right? It's just like a very simple way, and people rightfully so want reliable answers out of these AI models. And I think as we're gonna see more and more people from across the world use these models, I think it's important to like encapsulate this in benchmarks.
So professional domains, this is a big area, and I know that Scale, like we've done other work in this space. Obviously, we recently released the Remote Labor Index, or RLI. Calvin, I'm curious, like how does this leaderboard sit alongside that? Like, what are the differences?
Yeah, there's a few key differences. I think Faiza alluded to one of them, which is in our professional domains benchmark, we focus on two specific verticals. We focus on legal and finance, right? While on Remote Labor Index, we have a wide variety of end-to-end workflows that you would ask freelancers, right? So some examples of those are, for example, if you are a singer and you want some of your tracks mixed together, you would go to Upwork, you go to Fiverr, and this is what RLI, Remote Labor Index, is trying to assess. In this case, Remote Labor Index also uses tools, and in professional domains, we don't have tools in tool use in our benchmark. And the reason for that is that, as Advait said, if he needs some information about his taxes, he doesn't necessarily need an agent to do the taxes for him. And we might get there at some point in the future, right? But for now, I just want to learn more about how do I file my taxes. Or for me, when I was moving to the US, what are the things I should take into consideration when I apply for a visa in the US, right? So there's still a lot of reasoning questions that we as users of these language models ask on a daily basis. And yeah, this is what we're measuring with our benchmark.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like if I were to put these into two different buckets, right? So remote labor index, right? That is measuring an agent and their capability at automating some like end-to-end work product or task, like some kind of deliverable, like create a presentation or some CAD diagrams or like some architectural blueprints. And so the intended interaction there is like human gives prompt or some kind of statement of work to an agent. Agent goes off and does that using some tools and comes back with the actual product or the deliverable. Whereas here, it's chat, right? So
Exactly.
the interaction is chat. You're talking to this model as the professional and asking questions like you would actually ask a professional.
Yeah.
And in our case, we also have extended multi-turn conversations, right? RLI does not really measure that. It's usually a single request and a single output from the model. In our case, normal users would just ask a question, maybe ask for clarifications, and maybe switch topic a little bit. So these are all things that we try to capture in our benchmark.
Yeah.
One thing I want to clarify is that we've created this benchmark particularly because I think when we say we're measuring reasoning capabilities of LLMs, we have, the research community and industry have primarily focused on math and science based reasoning. And as these models are getting like scoring medals in international Olympiads, and now people's question is that are they actually really useful for real life sophisticated reasoning?
Right.
Hence this benchmark. So, and what we also identify is that just throwing tools and agency at this benchmark is not cutting it.
Yeah.
So it is reasoning heavy, and it requires grounded reasoning in real life.
I think this is such an important point because with so much attention around agents and agentic benchmarks, like obviously there's a lot of work to be done there, and there's a lot of activity there. But we are by no means done with reasoning models. Like there is a lot more surface area to cover, a lot more for models to learn to be truly intelligent representatives of different kinds of professions. So I'm curious, so you mentioned a bit about like math and science relative to legal and finance. Like, what are some other aspects of legal and finance that are particular interest for evaluating large language models?
I think there are like two ways to answer this question. One is like we are partially inspired by current usage statistics. Professionals are trying to use these as assistants for their professional workflows. But also, I think that is not 100% like truly reflecting what would be the usage, what would usage look like if the capabilities of these models were actually at the desired levels.
Right.
What we are observing is that there is a lot of loss of trust and disengagement by observing the responses from these models where they are just, often jumping into the conclusions confidently while lacking the due diligence. And when an expert sees that happening, they basically lose trust in these systems because it's lacking the necessary steps.
Yeah, I think like models that are kind of trained on these very verifiable tasks, a lot of times they have this behavioral tendency to kind of always want to say, like, provide an answer, even though there is some sort of uncertainty in the question itself, or there's not that robust of an evaluation of how should models actually handle uncertainty, which is a big part of these like professional domains. And I feel like that's also kind of the nuance that you go to a professional or an expert for. So that's kind of something that we want to encapsulate with this benchmark is have these criteria or prompts that have this kind of real world uncertainty in them and create the model and how it navigates that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to the point of the delta between the verifiable domains like math, coding, and these more vague, if you want, domains, right? I think a couple of days ago, there was a mathematician from, I think, UCLA that published a new proof for some convex optimization stuff. And he said, oh, I just built this using the help of ChatGPT and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a lawyer or someone who works in finance say, oh, I've built this new model just using ChatGPT.
Right.
So I think there's still a big delta to cover there, right?
Yeah. And it's always the opposite, actually.
Right.
Here, like, you know, I've seen examples of like attorneys getting in trouble for citing precedent that ChatGPT told them, which doesn't actually exist, right? Okay, let's get into actually how the benchmark was made itself, right? Because these are really complicated domains, right? Like I feel like a lot of benchmarks we work on, I have a good sense of like what good looks like and what difficult looks like. But in these domains, I have no clue, and I don't know if if any of you are lawyers or financial analysts either. So like, how did we actually make a really compelling benchmark here?
Yeah, so I think one key thing was having the right people help us build the benchmark. So we had a pool of experts that helped us build this benchmark, and these experts were coming from all over the world. Yeah. So we know that the legal field is very jurisdiction dependent. It's very country dependent, right? So we had people from the US, from the UK, from Italy, from Australia, from Brazil, from basically all over the world to help us build these tasks.
Right.
Because we want to capture a wide variety of possible jurisdiction and different ways of that people do law, right? And also we wanted to screen sort of our experts, right, for people who have done this like professional, who have the professional experience. So all of the people who worked on our project had on average more than 5 years of experience.
Oh, wow.
And everyone had at least a graduate degree and or 6 or more years of experience. So we really try to screen for people who have had that professional experience and then can give us and help us with the knowledge they built over the years to build this benchmark.
Right. So I'm curious, how did we, so like that makes sense in terms of figuring out what kind of topics to include and like what good responses are. But on like the prompt side, like how did we figure out what are the actual kinds of prompts that like real people might ask a professional in this case?
Yeah, it was a lot of talking to subject matter experts, kind of picking their brain on what their use case looks like. Also, we have this tool, our platform called Showdown for Scale, and that gives us a distribution of real-world prompts collected all across the world on people actually interacting with these frontier models, not just a single model, like a model of their choice on what kind of tasks in the finance and law domain that they need help with. So that kind of helped us see the distribution of, or just create a mental model of what are things that are overrepresented, underrepresented, or look at conversations where people are not that satisfied with their answers and wish that frontier models would do better.
Right. And I'm curious, are the prompts in this benchmark like from one expert to another, or are they from like a non-expert to an expert, or both?
We have both forms. Expert questions from professionals are about comprising the 75% of the finance split and about 50-50 for law domain.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And like, why capture both? Like, why is it interesting to know professional to professional or non-professional to professional?
I guess because that's both professionals and non-experts like come to these models with questions. And again, that was inspired by partly looking at Showdown data and also the recent statistics released by Frontier Labs.
Yeah.
And also asking experts, right? What are the questions that like how do they use language models on a day-to-day basis? They both ask questions themselves that they want answers to, but they also get questions from their customers, right? And maybe they could think, oh, if a language model could just answer this, I could save some time and not have to deal with this customer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. It's an interesting way of looking at model behavior too, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the knowledge; it's about how it's presented back to the user, right? Because if I'm a financial analyst and I ask a question that like indicates I am someone with knowledge to a model, I'm expecting it to answer back in a language that makes sense to an expert.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm not, and like I get back like a bunch of math, right? I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? Even if it's correct, as like a non-technical or like someone that's not actually in that field asking a question about taxes, that's not gonna be that helpful for me. So it seems like it's also a way of like looking at different behaviors when the prompts are clearly from an expert or clearly from a non-expert.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times when you're kind of spinning up these training recipes to control for model behavior, it's generally looking at instruction following or how things are formatted or like the surface level of how you want the response to be shown to the user. And then you have these probably internal policy on like how the model should, or model has its own personality, for example. But there is what we want to also, and this is why the expert, non-expert split is also important, is like the way you present information given the context of the prompt. At the end of the day, like the user is going to use that to like make a decision. And in these domains, these decisions are economically and personally super important. So how does the model kind of take that into consideration and use its context to like frame its response better?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so I think we have a good sense of the setup here now, right?
Yeah.
Like we have these prompts, we have these experts that are informing the prompts and the responses. So, like, given this, how do we actually evaluate models with this data? Faiza, can you maybe add some more color to that?
Yeah. So I mentioned rubric-based grading. Each prompt or conversation comes with a specific rubric comprising a few dozens of criteria. Each criteria is describing the properties of a desired response, or also alluding into what should not appear in this response. Primarily inspired by common errors made either by professionals or LLMs. And once we have this rubric, we are able to automatically evaluate using an LLM-based grader to come up with a score. And I think what we did particularly pay attention to in creating this benchmark, when creating our rubric, we made sure that it speaks the LLM's language, because that's what we are going to use for grading anyway. So if the professional annotator creating this rubric thought that their rubric or criteria are not intelligible to the LLM, they have rephrased it accordingly so that it is like clearly understood and it's self-contained. I think this is particularly important for a reliable evaluation.
That's really interesting. So what you're saying is that, like, in the naive setting, you might have an expert come up with some rubrics. That rubric might be correct, but like leverage a lot of jargon or like something that that the model might not easily understand. And so we ensured that that they designed the rubric such that the model could understand objectively what it was trying to evaluate or judge in the response.
Yeah, we wanted to leave as little room as possible for interpretation, because it's not our intention that the LLM grader takes up initiative to evaluate a response. We want to reflect that that evaluation is 100% in alignment with experts' understanding of the evaluation.
Yeah, we want to reduce variance as much as possible there.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm curious, like, what what do these rubrics look like? Like, do they have specific categories? Like I think I heard that we weight them, right? Can we add a bit more information to that?
Well,
Yeah. So I guess we have like a common set of categories where they're applicable to both domains, right? So for example, legal or financial accuracy, that's kind of the most basic one where you want what the model said to be accurate, right? And then we have like domain-specific categories as well. So for finance, one of the things that we came across is a lot of times experts are frustrated because they cannot audit or verify the LLM's process in generating its response. So even though it might have stumbled upon a somewhat correct-looking response, for it to actually be of use to the person, there needs to be either in the message itself or somehow in its reasoning trace kind of like a auditable process that it follows. So that's one of the rubric criteria for finance. Whereas for legal, obviously there's the legal accuracy side, but then how do you apply the law to the facts presented is something or an exercise that lawyers generally do, and that's what they're paid for, I guess. So that's like a taxonomy that we have for law. So that's on the taxonomy for the criteria. Obviously, there's some that, again, like practical utility or supplemental insight that are generally common across both domains. And then coming to the weights thing, it's kind of given how much this rubric is important to answering this question. I guess that's the easiest way to talk about weights. So let's say we have a range that you define for like positive and negative weights of rubrics. And then if something is kind of like 5 times more important in the answer, it should have like 5 times more of the weight. That's like one way to think about it. Yeah.
So the final score looks something like this, right? So like you have the rubrics and the response, and those are passed to a judge. The judge, is it binary, like yes or no? That
per criteria.
Per criteria.
Yeah.
And then you then apply that to the weights and then add it up. And then I'm guessing you divide by the total number of like the sum.
Yeah, the sum of all.
And then, so then like, what is passing and failing here? Like if you have some score at the end of it, like, is it like 100% is passing, or like, is there some like threshold?
I guess passing and failing, it's like less of an exam style benchmark, or just in general, the rubrics framework is kind of giving you this more of like a continuous signal of how well the model is doing than just a binary pass fail. So you could actually, this gives you more data, right? Like you can look at your model and see what kind of rubrics it's failing against. So you can use the taxonomy that we've defined, or kind of use your own clustering, or figure out how to improve, or what areas is this model failing at. So I guess there is no passing mark here, but the more the better. Yeah.
And some criteria, not all criteria, are created equal.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Some critically important or critically detrimental aspects, if they are missed, that's a greater, like a bigger red flag than like missing something, some nice to haves.
And and that's represented by larger weights.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if I ask about my 401k and the response only talks about my Roth IRA, then I'm like, this is model you just
Fail.
right? No matter what the other criteria say.
Immediate F.
Exactly.
So like some of these rubric categories, right? They're I think they're somewhat novel in this space. And I'm curious, like, where did those emerge from?
Yeah, those have emerged from our initial interviews with professionals. We have wanted to understand what their experience was using chat models, specifically focused on their frustrations, and then what makes them actually give up on using them. And process transparency and auditability was like one finance-specific rubric category that came up. Another one is application of law to the facts. And I think this aspect primarily distinguishes the types of reasoning benchmarks that are for science and math domains and the ones that we are covering right now.
Yeah.
Because often you can identify the law that is relevant to this particular use case asked or described in the question, but the fact pattern is what matters.
Right.
Does that law apply to your particular case?
Right.
So we have a significant portion of our criteria actually describing this like testing this alignment for law domain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's almost it's not going to be a one size fits all on rubrics for every professional domain. Like it makes total sense to have professionals in the loop that are like guiding and like saying these are actually the things that are particularly relevant for our profession because they'll know better than us, right? Like the example you gave. Was it applying the law to the facts or something like that?
Application of law to the facts.
Application of law to the facts, yeah. Like, I mean, I think any of us can like look up a statute or something and then like look at a situation and draw some inference, but it's not going to be right? Because it's not just like the letter of the law, but also like precedent interpretation and like all these kinds of things that attorneys actually know and study and understand based on their experience and knowledge, and so, but that's like a very obvious thing that someone who's not an expert in that field might not consider.
Yeah, I guess that also kind of ties into the tool use thing, where if it's just about finding out what the relevant law is for this prompt and retrieving that from either online or from some source, if you enable tool use, then the models will do that pretty well, or that's something that they're constantly improving on. But the lawyers get paid these big bucks for actually, once they identify what cases are relevant, how does that apply to the fact pattern?
Right.
And I feel like that's kind of the reasoning or implicit reasoning that we want to test here.
That makes sense. So, Kelvin, I'm curious, like creating these rubrics, we had the input from the experts, we understand what the categories are, but actually creating high quality rubrics must have been difficult. Like how do we actually go about doing that?
It is quite challenging. And I think, as you said, we need the experts in the loop, right? But there are some things that we as researchers can define. For example, we always want our rubrics to be MISI. That's one of the things that you want,
What
right?
is that?
So MISI stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, right? So you don't want two rubrics to evaluate the same thing, because then you might get a higher score than you should have gotten on the answer, right? If you have, I don't know, two rubrics asking, has this satisfied A and has this satisfied A again?
Right.
And you grade it twice. You
Double
get
counting.
Double counted, right? But you also want to be exhaustive. So the way I think about this is you have two types of being exhaustive.
Right.
The first one is you want to respond to all the things that are explicitly asked in the prompt, right? And these things are things that we can easily verify. But the second thing, which I think is much harder for us to do and where we need our experts' input, is you want to have the things that are implicitly asked in the prompt that an expert with a lot of years of experience would know to look for in an ideal response.
Right.
So you have these two parts of the exhaustive part. But I also think that when we talk about rubrics, there is still a lot of research to do.
Right.
It's we haven't figured out the perfect science for it yet, and this is why it's so exciting. There's still so much work to be done on how do we define the rubrics, how many rubrics do we need, and there's still questions that we are actively exploring. And this is just one step, right? But there's so much more to come.
Yeah. What are the rules for rubrics? Or the rubrics for rubrics, you might say.
Exactly.
I want to say that they have to be accurate to begin with, and objective. We have defined it such that as an overwhelming majority of experts should agree on the rubric.
Yeah.
This is not a subjective benchmark. It is accuracy and correctness and objectivity, like were the top things that we have controlled and quality checked for, along with all these like quality aspects.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting how the usage of rubrics and and LLM judges is evolving, not only for evaluations but also for reinforcement learning.
Yeah.
And like, I think the rubric design, especially for more subjective tasks, is an area that's like just critically important for unlocking RL scalability in this domain. So it's really, really exciting. One thing I found super interesting was this usage of negative rubrics, which Faiza, you mentioned a bit earlier, that we have these rubrics that are basically like not what should be included, but what should not be included, or like what should not be done. So I'm curious if you can add more details, like what's a good example of this, and like why did we include these?
So rubrics become hackable unless you penalize for undesired properties. So if the chatbot is reciting an incorrect or irrelevant law, we should be able to penalize or deduct points for that.
Right.
So those are what negative rubrics are covering for.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think, again, as Calvin mentioned, you kind of don't want the same positive rubric being turned into a negative rubric, because then, again, that's double counting in some way.
Right.
And then you kind of also need to, since we're basically summing up the weights and scoring these models, the way you write negative rubrics you need to be pretty careful with it as to not artificially kind of deflate these scores. Whereas in theory, you could just like flip all your positive rubrics to negative, and then like you have like a negative score in the benchmark, right? For the mistakes the model makes. So I think, there's like a set of practices that we follow internally that we've discussed, but it's also a cool kind of research problem, especially on the training side or RL training, where the model is trying its best to hack this reward signal that we're providing, and negative rubrics are like super important.
Yeah.
I mean, to add to that, think about any question you could ask a model. If you regurgitate the entirety of Wikipedia, right?
Technically, it'll pass.
Technically,
It will
it's
pass.
going to
If
be
you don't
100%.
have negative rubrics, right? It will just pass. So negative rubrics are kind of a protection for these unwanted behaviors that you would have otherwise.
That makes sense. So I'm curious, like, what actually were the results? Like, what models are top at the leaderboard? Like, what are the metrics looking like?
So we have two splits. The full set is still challenging and at the frontier. And we also have a hard subset, which is about 50% of the examples which we have identified as particularly challenging for frontier models.
So like ballpark like numbers, like what are we doing?
Yeah, pretty much, especially on the hard subset, the max score is like below 40%.
Below 40%.
For both domains.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think it's going to be a source of excitement for researchers, like a new challenge to conquer.
Totally. So when you look at how well models are performing or not, like what surprises you? Like what stands out?
Yeah, one thing actually that stood out to me is obviously you have like the performance, like the raw performance scores, but then you can also like plot them against things like response length, for example, as Calvin was mentioning. Like some models just have a lot of tokens that they use to like provide an answer, but still do not yield performance compared to like some of these models that are more token efficient. And so that's like a cool insight that we have. But yeah, I think there's also this kind of like economic decisions analysis that we want to provide that kind of clusters these prompts or just examples in our benchmarks into more kind of what kind of economic decisions in finance and law or economic value do they correlate with. Yeah.
One more interesting thing is how models can be so confidently wrong. They will just tell you something and be like, I'm so sure this is the right thing. And then you actually go check it. It's not correct, right?
Yeah.
So now when I try to ask models for financial advice or legal advice, I'm always a bit more wary of the response and try to take it with a grain of salt. I think that was an interesting thing to see.
Yeah. Unsurprisingly, they are better at instruction following than they are at financial accuracy. legal accuracy. If you ask them to generate a contract, they give you a contract. But does it cut it in terms of quality and completeness? And the results say not there yet.
Yeah. One of the things I found really interesting from the paper was that when we added tools, the models actually did worse, which is somewhat counterintuitive, right? So I think we added like internet search or something like that.
Yeah.
Can you maybe speak a bit to that?
I am not surprised personally because we have designed this benchmark to be primarily a reasoning benchmark than an agentic or tool use benchmark. When you equip these models with these tools, they overuse them. Basically, which would have been a simple reasoning question that is like time insensitive. They try to like search all around the web to come up with something relevant and then cite like 10, 15 resources. And professionals are often confused with this. Like I was talking to a finance expert and he was like, it's reciting all these resources and none of them was needed.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation and like results because what it suggests is that like truly capable agentic systems that are supporting professional use cases have to be really good at knowing when to actually use tools and when not, right? And I think there's this like you said, overusage of tools, and sometimes that's not necessary. And so there's like more work to be done, I think, to I don't want to say routing is not the right word, but like understand when should I rely on internal knowledge versus when should I actually use tools. And we see that in the consumer space. I think models do a pretty good job of like answering direct facts, like when was Abraham Lincoln born? Okay, they're not going to search Wikipedia. Hopefully they don't. But I think in professional domain, like we're not quite there yet. And oftentimes it's more efficient not to, right? To just leverage really powerful reasoning capabilities. All right, so one thing I just want to end on is, I'm curious, like what kind of research trends do you all think will actually move the needle forward on this benchmark?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess from actually the benchmark creation side, obviously we would want to expand this to more domains, but actually improving model performance on this benchmark, I think, looking at kind of how we've presented the taxonomy of rubrics and seeing like the analysis on what kind of failure modes the models are currently showing. Most of them, as Faiza mentioned, are doing pretty well on these kind of instruction following tasks, but I think handling uncertainty or kind of expressing the model's own uncertainty in its response, I think is like not just for this benchmark, but just in general when we have millions, probably billions soon, people using these models. I think that's like a research area that's definitely something that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot to be done on just how we create rubrics, right? The science of rubric creation, as Advait said. And generally speaking, maybe a little more broadly on these sort of less verifiable domains. We've also recently published some work on moral reasoning, which is famously hard to verify, right? So I think that's a very interesting direction. And another thing that Advait alluded to earlier was sometimes models are more efficient than other models, right? And maybe how do we make models more efficient and still correct? So maybe using fewer tokens. That could be a proxy for that. That's an interesting research direction.
Right.
I would say that this, at least the first part of the secret sauce is out there, in the sense that this is I think a lot of rubric-based like training recipes that involve rubrics could definitely make progress in this benchmark, especially on questions that are reasoning heavy that require some analysis, and rubrics that evaluate those analysis could actually make a lot of progress, I think. We have, again, like kind of overly focused on science and math domains and like coding, and then kind of like overlooked these type of questions which are still requiring reasoning.
Yeah. seems like there's a lot of hill to climb out there. And I know this is just the start in terms of professional domains for us. So this seems like a good place to end, though. Thank you all for joining and chatting about this leaderboard. And that wraps up this episode of Chain of Thought. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Thank you.